Hello, everyone, and welcome to Creativity Worth Expressing. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today I'm here with special guest. I'm here with John Delaney. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yep, yeah, that's fine.
I'm here with John Delaney. John, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, Ryan. And you?
I'm doing fantastic. And to get us started with this episode, can you introduce yourself and also share what is your creative form to the audience?
Yeah, now I'm a retired accountant. I was 45 years as an accountant at like a CPA in my own in my in a partner in a firm, and I retired in 2020 full time from full time work. But my writing career goes back to probably the late 1990s when I sent off a speculative plot for a murder mystery party game, the sort of people where 8 people would gather around a table and get dressed up and have a few drinks and try and guess who the murderer is. So it's a sort of dinner party game that were very popular late 80s and into the 2000s. So I sent a plot for that off on spec, and that was my first really lucky break to get into sort of major creative work. In that the manufacturer of these box games came back, said, sounds great. We'll give you a publishing contract. We're just looking for a new writer. So that was purely brilliant timing just to get in at the right moment. So they accepted this game for publication, and then back at the time that was on the shelves of Toys R Us and Hamleys, the big sort of toy store in London. So it's an amazing feeling to actually get your hands on, a box, a physical box, with your name on. And I did probably over 5 years. I did 10 box games for them. And since then, I've probably written another 30 plots for different games. And most of those are now for sale on my website, playmurdermystery.com. So people go on there, they download a game, and they basically have a party using the game materials to sort of invite guests along. So that was really how I started. That then developed to some degree because some of the murder mystery games they wanted to run as fundraisers. I was asked to convert some of the games into larger group games, so which are like a scripted one that you can do on a stage in front of a room full of people. So I probably set up about 6 or 7 games in a scripted format. So to me, that was my first script writing experience. And strangely, that then led to writing a musical, because I met a guy on a songwriting course who got a lot of songs that he'd never done anything with. And over a glass of wine on this course, I sort of semi-volunteered to say, let me have a listen to your songs and I'll see if I can do something with them. How about we try and turn them into a musical? And 3 years later, we actually managed to get a musical on stage at a local theatre, quite a prestigious theatre in our part of the world. And to see 40 people on stage singing and dancing all onto a musical that you've written is just a stunning experience. And that then led, strangely enough, to 2 more musicals and then an opera. And then finally, when I sort of retired from the accountancy, that's when I decided to have a go at writing some novels. And 3 years later, I've just finished the trilogy.
Can you share with us again the name of the trilogy?
It's the Jurassic Jemma Trilogy.
The Jurassic.
Jurassic Jemma. So it's
Okay.
3 murder mysteries about a sassy fossil hunter. Because in England we have something called the Jurassic Coast, which is a section, probably about a 50-mile section of coastline where Jurassic rocks are just exposed in the cliffs. And it's a fantastic place for fossil hunting and finding, all sorts of creatures over the years, plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, a lot of marine reptiles. And then round onto the Isle of Wight in southern England as well, where they find quite a few dinosaurs. Not up to the American standard of dinosaurs, I'm afraid, but we still found a few. Found a
Yeah,
few.
we can see you have so much creativity in your life, but when did it start?
It's difficult to answer that because when I was young, I did read a lot. I used to love to read, and I remember when I was probably 7 or 8, actually writing a big poem. And I've actually still got a copy of that poem buried somewhere. So I can trace it back to that time. And I've always been into probably poetry more than any other topic, but I've always loved. I did English at school right through to 18. So I was always very keen on the English side. But ended up in a career as an accountant, which is sort of slightly going down the maths side of things. But again, even accountants, you need to be able to express yourselves and explain things to clients. So having good literacy skills, I think is very important. But I think it's always been there. I did find out I've got an uncle in Ireland who's a poet, quite a famous sort of poet. And to go and visit him and hear some of his work was amazing. But I don't think neither my mother or my father were particularly sort of creative. So I'm not quite sure where it's come from, but it's just always been
Mm,
there. And then I've always been a person to, if you get an opportunity to just seize it, not worry about anything, just do it.
mm.
That's my mantra on life, is just do it. I'll have to sell that one to Nike, I think, whatever.
And now going to your love for the board games, for even making these games, uh, were there any games that you would play as a teenager, as a young man?
Um, yeah, probably all the standard board games that we'd get in England, the Monopolies and the Scrabbles and those. And then once we married and got friends in a similar circle with them, we started used to play a lot of these murder mystery games, which, you'd get an invite through and you'd have to go and dress up in whatever the fancy dress was for this particular theme, be it some of the ones I've done, have been set in the American Wild West, they've been set in ancient Rome, they've been vampire ones and Halloween ones. So you basically go and have a party, get dressed up, have a few drinks, and one of the people there would be the murderer. And you'd ask lots of questions and go backwards and forwards. And over the night, course of the night, you'd then have to guess who the murderer was based on the clues that you'd seen and heard. So we used to play quite a few of these games, and I remember playing one night, came out, and I thought, I'm sure I could write one of those, and started trying to put one together. And 3 months later, I'd actually got a game in a format that I could send off. And the idea for it, I always remember coming down and on our wall, we've got a map of the Caribbean. And I looked at the Caribbean islands and thought, oh, Barbados, you could have a character called Barbie Doss. Because all these games used to have stupid names, fun names for all the characters. So I ended up with Barbie Doss and Jim Acre and Granny Ada and lots of very, very stupid names, but all came from this map with all the Caribbean islands. And that was the game that actually got published as Murder on Paradise Island.
Okay.
So that was a fantastic way in. And I think one of the most amazing things about the murder mystery side of things is that probably over 20 years, I've had sales of in excess of 100,000 units. So it's quite a big concern. And that's with an average game, a game size of sort of 10 players. That means 1 million people have actually taken part in murder mystery games that somehow have come out of this strange imagination. And that I just cannot get my head around the fact that, you've had 1 million players have actually taken part in these games.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I think that's the beautiful thing about being creative and also taking the risk to get it out there. So, when you were able to get your work out there, how did it make you feel? I know you said you couldn't wrap your head around it, but internally, what were your emotions like knowing that people were playing your game?
It's amazing because you'd hand hold one of these games, and then I think I got a phone call from somebody to say they were in Hamleys in London, which is a very big, prestigious toy store. It's like the Selfridges, Harrods, but the toy equivalent. And they said, one of your games is on the shelf,
Uh-huh.
and they rang me to tell me this, and it was just, and then to go into our local Toys R Us store and see these games on the shelf, with your name on it. It's just a feeling is very difficult to describe. It's just a mixture of perhaps a bit of pride, but just it's such a lovely feeling to see something that you've created being turned into a physical product that people are prepared to pay for.
Uh,
So very enjoyable.
While you were creating this game, what would you say was maybe the most challenging element about the process?
I think keeping the logic side of things going, because a lot of the games are, they're basically it's a who done it. You're trying to solve a who done it. So, and over a period, a sort of 10, probably up to 8, 9, 10 rounds, you'd have a lot of people asking each other's questions and revealing clues. So you've got to keep the logic side of it going, that if somebody asks another player something in round 8, it didn't contradict something that somebody else had said in round 5. So keeping it organized, I ended up with some big grids covered in yellow post-its with all the interactions between all the guests. And I think that's possibly where where the accountant side of things came in, and that I like to be sort of ordered, and you'd have a big sort of spreadsheet type thing with all the interactions, so you could see in one place what was happening, and just a brief summary of each round and who was asking what. And that's something I've carried on with through any sort of medium I've actually written, be it a mystery game, be it a musical, an opera, or a novel, is that I've kept the same sort of way of plotting things, the way that planning it using these yellow stickers. And the reason I always use the yellow post-its is that you can move things as you're going along. If you want to change something, they're very easy just to move.
Mm.
But I've always regarded it as just writing. And that whether it's a murder mystery game, which is perhaps 5,000 words, whether it's a musical, which is perhaps 15,000 words, or whether it's a book, a novel, which is perhaps 85, 90,000 words, to me, it's all just writing, but they're all just in a slightly different format. And it's the same whether you do songwriting or any type of writing. It's just writing. It's just getting your imagination onto a piece of paper.
Now I want to transition into your other form of creativity, which is the writing, and we have your trilogy, and it's right behind you. The Gemma, the Jurassic Gemma, the trilogy, the Jurassic Gemma trilogy. Now,
Yeah.
can you share with us the names of each book?
The first book is called A Dangerous Fossil. That was my sort of breakthrough novel that introduced Jurassic Jemma as a character. The second book is called Jurassic Jemma and the Mysteries of Time. And then the third and final part of the trilogy is Jurassic Jemma and the Trail of Evil. So my tagline for the first book was Mary Anning meets Indiana Jones, because there was a 19th century fossil hunter in England called Mary Anning, and she was somebody who she discovered and identified all the early big fossils, the marine mammals, the marine reptiles rather, that were about at the time. And she found these, but because she was, one, a woman, two, she was not a posh class, not she was working class, and she wasn't highly educated. Basically, the establishment didn't take her seriously. Reading her autobiography, it's horrible. She just wasn't taken seriously. But a lot of perhaps we would say, the gentlemen of the British Geological Society all wanted to come and take her work, take her knowledge, and then go away and present it as theirs.
Mm.
So it was awful how she was treated. But I read her biography and thought, well, it would be nice to come up with a contemporary version of Mary Anning, and that's where the name Jurassic Jemma came from. Just Jemma Thorne, but she had to have a bit of a nickname, so Jurassic Jemma just seemed perfect for her.
So, can you share with us a little bit about Jurassic Gemma? Like, what is her background? What is a bit of her story?
Yeah, Jurassic Jemma is a lady in her 40s, who is a lecturer at a university. She's a lecturer in geology and paleontology at a university. She's a part-time sort of fossil hunter, and also she's a trustee of her local museum in a fictional Dorset town called Lulcombe. So the book starts with her going out on a stormy beach, um, very early in the morning when it's just about getting light, and the cliffs have been heavily pounded in the night by the waves. She goes along the beach with her dog Dino, because she has a bit of a sidekick called Dino the dog, and Dino starts barking at something sticking out of the cliff, and she wanders over and sees that it's a skull. It's part of a skull of an incredible fossil that she finds. So she then gets a team together to try and get this fossil dug out of the mud and stone and rock before the tide comes back in again. So there's a race against time all during the day, and there's another landslide as well during the day. So there's danger for what they're doing. But she finds this incredible fossil, and she thinks that's, because she's going to donate it to a local museum. She thinks that's going to save her local museum. Unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous property developers who want to buy the museum site, knock it down, and build a big hotel. So the fact that she's found this big fossil that they're going to put into the museum, that's really where her troubles start. And that's why the fossil that she found actually ends up being quite dangerous for her and her friends and family.
How did you find the time to start writing?
I think I've always done it as a sort of part-time thing, the murder mystery games and the musicals and the operas, the opera. I've always done it really as a hobby.
Hmm.
Although it was, very nice to have a hobby that actually contributed rather than cost. It's very unusual to have a hobby like that. So it was only really once I retired, stopped being full-time in 2020, that I thought, yeah, I could probably have a go at writing a book. And at that point, it was a very vague thought. And it was at the time that COVID hit. So we were all, with lockdown and limited what you could do. And the local museum in the city near where we live had a fundraising evening. And one of the lots on this fundraising raising evening was a masterclass with an author called Wendy Holden. She's a UK author who was big down the. First of all, she started off doing chick lit, and then she moved on to royals. So she now does biographies of royals and multi-million selling author. But it was a writing masterclass with her. So my wife said, "Do you fancy this?" She was trying to find something to bid on in this auction, I think, to help the fundraising effort. She said, "Do you fancy doing this?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be good. It'd be good to learn how to write a book." So she put a realistic bid in. It wasn't a lot, but because nobody else actually put a bid in, and I actually won this writing masterclass. We had to wait for a few months for COVID to all the lockdowns to
Hmm.
finish. So we arranged, I always remember we arranged this masterclass to take place in June 2021. And I thought, right, we'll wander along to this masterclass. This lady will tell me how to write a book. She'll give me some ideas and pointers and start me off. And about a month before the actual masterclass, I got a message from this lady saying, "Can you send me your first three chapters for us to talk about on the day?" And I thought at that point, I've got nothing. Got no idea, nothing written. So I had a mad scramble around really, and that's when, having just read Mary Anning's autobiography, I thought, I know, I could write a book about modern day fossil hunter. So really, it forced me to get my finger out and actually write this first three chapters and sent them off to her, and that formed the basis of our masterclass. I think if I hadn't have booked onto that course, I'm not sure I'd have ever actually got started on a novel. But because it was arranged and I'd got a month to try and come up with the ideas and to write three chapters, so I carried on with the idea and came up with a few characters and wrote the first three chapters, sent them off, and that formed the basis of our discussion. And she said, "Oh, I love the setting, I love the characters, but you perhaps need a murder in there, or you've got to have a bit more tension and suspense." And so she gave me a lot of pointers. And then that book probably took 18 months to actually get out there
Hmm.
because I wrote it in about 6 months. It took me 6 months to write a 90,000 word mystery thriller. But then to edit it took 12 months
Hmm.
because I was going on various courses trying to learn the trade a little bit. I had feedback from various authors. There's a lot of authors out there who will mentor, younger or upcoming authors or inexperienced authors, and not after any money. They just want to pass some of their knowledge on to other people, which is fantastic. Now I've written three books. I'm starting doing that with a few other people as well, trying to help them out. So various people helped. And then about 6 months before publication, I started going down the route because I had to decide whether to try and get an agent and go down the traditional publisher route. But I think with having retired after, 40, 45 years of quite sort of high pressure work, in finance, I thought I just don't want the pressure. I don't want deadlines. So I decided I was going to go down the self-publishing or indie publishing or whatever, best tag to attach to it. So I thought I'll have a go at doing it myself. So I ended up engaging, first of all, a structural editor who spends a while going through your plot, coming back with all the comments on this doesn't work, or have you thought about this? So that's looking at the big picture side of the book. I then engaged a copy editor, proofreader, who goes through it line by line and comes back and tell you where you've missed out comma or grammar or spelling, whatever. So at the same time, you've got a cover designer on the go. So there are three real professionals that help out with it. So I found the two editors I found off Fiverr, which is a sort of I don't know if you've got it in the States, but it's just a way of
Yeah.
getting together with other professionals. The cover designer, I've just got a referral from somebody and found him on the internet. So with the three other professionals, I ended up getting the book to the state where I could load it up onto Kindle Direct Publishing. Got that loaded up November 22, that would be. And then several weeks later, you actually get your hands on the very first copy. And just for, for dramatic effect, to actually get, sorry, it's a bit dark in this room at night, to get your hands on one physical copy of your first book is just such an incredible feeling. So that's really what happened. And then got that out there and lots of people started buying it, got a lot of feedback and some of it very annoying feedback. So like, oh yeah, I read your book in 2 days. When's the next one coming out? You think, it's just taken me 18 months to get that book. Can't you make it last longer than 2 days? But the feedback was so good. And I've sort of built up a following of readers who can't wait for the next one. So November 23, I then got the second book out, Jurassic Jemma and the Mysteries of Time. And then November 24, I released the third book, Trail of Evil. So that's really the process. It was a bit of a sort of not quite accidental way in, because I'll just jump and do things. I'll have a go, and then accept the idea, and then try and sort it afterwards.
If Wendy Holden didn't get sorry, if she didn't get a hold of you and ask you for the first three chapters, do you think that the world would have ever heard about Jurassic Gemma? Would that have ever come out?
Possibly not, because it really forced me. Okay, I'd perhaps got the seed of the idea there, but it may have taken a lot more years to ever get to that stage. The fact that she forced me to come up with the characters, I'd got a deadline to work to, and I knew I'd got to come up with something. And then she gave me some, great guidance. I think one of the bits of guidance was, whatever you do, don't kill the dog, because it was quite poetic. Because Mary Anning in the 19th century, her dog was killed in a landslide. So I thought, that'd be neat to have the contemporary version, have her dog bite the dust at some point. But she said, "Oh no, I don't agree with you killing the dog. Kill lots of people off, but never kill the dog." But no, so I don't think if I hadn't gone through that process of that sort of bid in an auction and winning the master class, I may never have gone down that avenue.
And when it comes to finding names, because okay, we have Jurassic Gemma. Her dog is, what's the name of her dog?
Dino.
Dino. How do you come up with their names? I mean, is there like a methodical way, or you just choose random?
I think I sort of choose randomly, but then I remember, you read a lot of books on, what to do and not to do when you're putting a book together. And one suggestion was try not to have too many characters with names beginning with the same initial, because readers get confused. If you've got a John and a Jeff and a Jane and a Jeremy, people just get confused. So I've got a big chart with all the names I've used in the books to try and spread them out really across the different letters of the alphabet, which is something you'd never think of in advance. But sometimes I've read books since and I've spotted, oh yeah, because that's Jeff and that's Jane and that's John and that's and your brain just sometimes can't remember, who all the people are. So I think it's slightly random to start with. I've got a book of baby names that I used to use for the murder mystery names, and I'm trying to come up with names for characters and that. I've got a book about 50,000 names, so quite often sometimes just open a page at random and just go down it until you pick a name that you think, yeah, that fits that character. So quite often what the character is, what they're going to do, what they're going to be like, and just getting the right name. But even at the end of it, at the end of the first book, one of my editors said, "I don't like a few of your names. I think that name's a bit boring. It's a bit." So liven it up. How about, he gave suggestions of a few other names, and you think, yeah, it's a good comment. Because I love criticism. I'm a strange person. I went on a writing course once and ended up on a course with, I think, 12 lady romance writers, which was an interesting weekend. But they all hated criticism because they took it very personally. And I'd argue with them. I said, look, criticism from people, as long as the people who are giving you the practical criticism, have got experience or they may know better than you, so just regard it as a suggestion. You don't have to accept it. But if someone who knows a lot more than you or has got better idea, gives you a suggestion, regard it as that. Don't regard it as criticizing what you've done. Just think, yeah, what you've done is great, but it could be improved if this happened or that happened. And that's why I've always been like a big sponge. I'll take sort of suggestions from so many people. And funnily enough, even one of the readers I had for my second book came back with a throwaway comment that gave me the idea for the third book.
Oh,
She said at the end of book two, I can't wait to see what Evil Gran is going to do. And that little seed that she said in her review sowed a seed for book three. So book three is about what Evil Gran actually gets up to.
when you're writing villains or antagonists, uh, how do you do your research to write such characters?
Um, I think you just delve into perhaps people you've come across in life. And I'm a naturally positive person. I'm a very much a glass half full. I don't watch soap operas on television, all the nastiness. I don't watch a lot of television programs where there's a lot of nastiness and backstabbing and people who hate each other. So a lot of the trying to get the tension in the novel is quite unusual for me. Because if I sort of wrote a book after my own personality, it would all be nice. Everybody would get on. There'd be no fights, and but it would obviously be a very boring thriller. So you've got to go against what your natural thoughts are, and you have to throw a lot of problems at your main protagonist. And this is something where you write something, and then somebody looks at it, and they'll come back and say, "Yeah, but it's a bit easy for them. You've got to put more obstacles." And that's something that came across perhaps when writing the musicals. The first version of any of the musicals I wrote would perhaps be a bit nice. And they said, look, you've got to put some more obstacles in. You need to build up the first third, and then there's got to be an obstacle that this a major setback for them that they've then got to turn around and try and overcome, and then perhaps another one about two-thirds of the way through, and then obviously at the end, if you wish, then everything comes right and it all fits together. But no, I do sometimes find writing the nasty side of things quite difficult.
Hmm.
But I think the more you do it, and then you start to imagine what else can I throw at this poor character, just when she thinks everything's going really well, this could happen to her. So you develop a nastier streak, I think, being a writer, because you're probably trying to think of lots of creative ways to kill people off, or put problems in the way. But then sometimes you regret it afterwards because you kill off a character, and I think I've put a lot of work, I've invested a lot of time and intellectual property in that character, and now I've killed them off. Such a waste. They could have gone on to book two or three, whatever. But it's just something you have to do and get used to.
While doing research for writing this book, what is the most interesting thing that you've discovered?
Um, I think one of the things that I decided to do because this was based on a fossil hunter on the Jurassic coast in the south of England in the county of Dorset. I really wanted to get in the feel of being a fossil hunter.
Hmm.
So over a number of years, we booked, we'd have a week or two down in Dorset. And I think the one I was trying to write the first few chapters of this book where they were working on the beach, but the tide was coming in. It was behind them. So what I actually did for that was to go and do some fossil hunting on the beach in Dorset when the tide was coming in. And the one thing I learned, which it's a very simple little thing, but when you're in that position and you know that high tide isn't for another 2 hours, so in theory, you've got 2 hours till the tide reaches where you're kneeling, but you cannot stop yourself looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes to see where the waves are breaking. So that there's a little tiny detail things that, perhaps a reader of a book would never notice, but when you're actually writing the book and researching it, I'm a big believer in I want to put myself in the position of what would somebody be like when they've got this big fossil to dig out and 3 hours to dig it in, but this tide is relentlessly coming closer and closer to them, and the waves are breaking closer and closer. So it's very good when you've actually experienced it firsthand on the beach, where the waves suddenly come up more around your knees, and you think, "Man, we just got to get off the beach." To put yourself in the position of your protagonist, it just helps you write better, I think, if you've really. So that's that sort of research on a very much a micro scale there's then obviously the macro research where you just got to learn about, 19th century fossil hunters and the area. So we have spent a lot of time down in Dorset, so I can write about the area. I also ended up doing a town plan for the fictitious resort that the books are set in, just so that you think, well, if it's going to take her 10 minutes to walk down to the sea, you can't then walk to the pub in 2 minutes. So just a lot of the detail you've got to try and get right, because I'm sure readers would pick you up on it, if there's
Yeah.
some glaring inconsistency. So, but that for me was the one thing. Probably the only other one was having to write a passage set in a storm, and we ended up staying in somewhere on the east coast of England. We were changing between two different accommodations, but the weather was awful. It was a real storm. And I managed to persuade my wife. We went and parked on top of a cliff in a car park in this absolute gale and storm, just so I could write for 10 minutes and get some ideas down as to what it was like with the wind whistling and the rain hammering against the car windscreen. So little things like that to put yourself in the position of your protagonist so that you can write, I don't know, more realistically what emotions are going through. And I think it was that one thing of forever looking over your shoulder. You've got 2 hours, but you cannot stop yourself just looking and seeing where the sea is.
And did you find any fossils?
Yeah, yeah, we've done quite a. Although, full of fact, I've found some quite good ones over the year, but nothing decent. And yet, my daughter, for her 30th birthday last year, we said, what do you want to do for your birthday? She said, could you go down to Dorset and do some fossil hunting? So
All
obviously,
right.
she's trained well. So we ended up on the beach down in Dorset, and I've been fossil hunting for 50 years, and I've never ever found the backbone of an ichthyosaur or a plesiosaur. My daughter, on her first session on the beach, picked up this small round stone and said, "Is this anything?" And I looked at it and I thought, "That's an ichthyosaur vertebra."
Mhm.
So that was one of her first sessions, and it just shows, you perhaps better eyes than me and somebody younger, but she picked this up, and that was something she found, and I've still to this day never found one. So very exciting, and I think there's one quote I actually use in the book as to somebody asked Jurassic Jemma, a journalist, interviews and said, why do you like fossil hunting? And I came up with this line that that if you crack a rock open and there's a fossil in the middle, you're the first person in 250 million years to ever see it. Nobody else has ever seen it. And that one quote, I think, almost sums up the whole fossil hunting idea of the books. It's just finding something that nobody else has ever seen.
How do you see your creativity evolving?
That's a very good question. At the moment, I've finished a trilogy, and there's an awful lot of work goes in to putting a book together to get 90,000 words in a good standard so that it can be published. There's a lot of work, 6 months of, oh, not quite full time, but a lot of work. And I think I decided after I did the third book, I've ended up with a nice clean ending. I thought I'm gonna draw a line under the third book, leave it as a trilogy. And then really in the future, I'm just going to wait and see what I fancy doing.
Mhm.
What I think this year I'm looking I'm trying to market the books a little more. Spend, rather than just launch into doing a fourth book. I think, well, I've got a trilogy now, and it's quite nice to be able to sell a set as a trilogy. So I'm doing some more marketing and trying to, increase the sales. And I think one of the things this year, I want to try and get back into a bit more songwriting. I've done little bits in the past, and I've probably got half a dozen songs that I can stand up and perform. But I think I would like to spend some more time trying to put some more songs together. And really waiting to see, because a lot of the things I've got involved with, whether it's the murder mystery and then going from a murder mystery into a musical and musical into an opera and then into the book, I've never really planned any of it.
Mhm.
It's always been, I've seen an opportunity and thought, yeah, I'll have a go at that. And it was really funny because after I'd done the three musicals, I met somebody with my accountant hat on who was a contemporary composer, a gentleman called Oliver Davis. And he's perhaps one of the top contemporary composers in the UK. He's had lots of albums, very highly thought of. Um, and I was in a taxi with him, talking about these musicals, and he said, "Do you fancy writing an opera?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, I have no idea. I didn't know anything about operas. I was totally honest with him. But I've written music because I regard it all as just writing and finding the right format. So I said, yeah, I'll have a go. So I went away and researched almost what an opera is and different types of opera. And over a 3 or 4 month period, we experimented with me trying to write in different formats that he could then compose to. Because what he wanted to do was for me to write the whole opera and then he would add the music afterwards. So I had to try and come up with an opera, but with no music to work to. And we tried various different almost shapes of writing before settling on a style I went back to my school days and the odd bit of Shakespeare we used to read, and iambic pentameter it was called, which is basically 5 beats a line. Whereas the first versions I was sending him were all 4 beats a line, and he said, "This it's going to sound like pop music." Is that what I was sending him was very like pop lyrics. So I tried going on to 5 beats a line, and that totally changed the feel of it. So I ended up, and he gave me a free rein. He said, "Come up with any theme, just go away and try and do." It. So I was doing a lot of research, and I came up with I found an Irish myth called Tír na nÓg, which is the land of eternal youth, which is very old Irish myth. So I ended up writing a version of the story of Tír na nÓg, and we put this whole opera together, sent it to him. He's composed so far probably 20, 25 minutes of it. And in the end, he says, and he's putting lots of feelers out. He said, "I don't think we're ever going to get this staged because the costs of full production and staging," he said at that point, he said they've gone over £125,000. So to actually stage a new opera is a major investment. So I don't think it'll ever see the light of day. But the one amazing thing is, he said, but one of the sections you've written, I think it could operate as a standalone aria and put it on one of my albums. So he took this 3 minute section out of the story, and he put he started doing all the full orchestration to it, the 20, 30 parts. And he came up with this piece, and he invited me and my wife to go down to Abbey Road Studios in London, which is where the Beatles did all their recording, very famous studios. And he said he'd hired the London Philharmonic Orchestra to come and record this piece, and he invited us to go along and watch the recording. So we were so excited about to actually go down to London and see this put together. And then something called COVID came along
Mm.
and it stopped it dead, unfortunately. But what he then did was he recorded it sort of remotely he hired one of the top sopranos in the UK, a lady called Grace Davidson, and he hired an orchestra in Budapest because they had slightly different regulations in Budapest about the orchestra all working together. So he got all the parts and then he brought them all back and reassembled them into this probably 3.5 minute piece that he called This Mortal Man. And he put that in his album, and it was one of the top tracks on this album. I think it got on 5 playlists on Apple, on iTunes. So I think to date it's had about 200,000 streams, but the whole lot got to #1 on the iTunes classical chart. So I'm claiming that as my #1. I've had a #1, I think got to #1 on the iTunes chart and 18 on the USA Billboard classical chart. So that my little author talks to do, I've referred to, I've had a #1 on iTunes, so I'm quite happy with that.
Are there any upcoming artists, writers, any upcoming creative people out there who you can suggest that we keep an eye out for?
Um, I'm very keen on a UK writer called Ellie Griffiths. She's written a series of mystery thrillers, probably similar genre to mine, called the Ruth Galloway books. And she's one that I think she's been going a bit longer than that. She's written 14, I think, in this series. So I've devoured the whole series relatively quickly, and perhaps see some similarities between her character, who's an archaeologist, and my character, who's a paleontologist. So there's a little bit of crossover. I'm trying to think really of anybody up and coming. A lot of the authors I like perhaps have been around a long time. Um, there's one guy who's a British comedian called Tony Hawks, not the skateboard guy. Um, And he wrote a book many years ago called Round Island with a Fridge, which is a humorous travel book about someone who bet him that he couldn't hitchhike around the circumference of Ireland with a fridge. So he decides that he's going to do this, and that's what the book's about. So he's one that I've followed a lot, and again, strangely, because we met him at an event just over 12 months ago, and I asked him how the fridge was getting on. Saoirse is the name he gave to the fridge, a Gaelic name. And he said, "Oh, it's a sad story, really. I went to try and recreate some of the journey, started off in Ireland, but ended up having to fly back. And he had to leave Saoirse in Northern Ireland with somebody that he knew. So one thing led to another, and I ended up, my wife and I went for a holiday to Northern Ireland last summer to actually go and retrieve his fridge. So we drove over there and came back. It's about a meter square, 3 foot square fridge that we brought back in the back of a car, and now persuaded him to come along to our local literary festival in March, and we're going to present him with his fridge back.
Okay.
So that's an amazing little story that my favorite book ever, I got to rescue the heroine, and I'm going to present her back to the author.
That's
So
awesome.
he's somebody that I always read any book he ever produces. So he's a chap called Tony Hawk's, a very funny book. That's one I'd always recommend to anybody. Round Island with a Fridge, because if you want a sort of feel good book that just makes you laugh.
Why is creativity important for you?
Um, I don't know if it's because with having a career in finance, and I think you perhaps use your math side of your brain. I've always loved to use the creative side because I think you exercise the other side of your brain. And there's an amazing thing that if you start, sometimes with a blank piece of paper, and to think that, this trilogy of books, I started with a blank piece of paper, and everything in that trilogy has come from my imagination. And that's why I just love it. I just love the act of writing, be it poetry or novels or musicals or whatever. I love all the writing. I'm not sure I quite like all the marketing bit afterwards, because if you write a musical, you have to put a lot of effort into ever try and get it on a stage. So I just love the writing bit. There's something about going from your imagination. I do it all onto pads using a pencil. I never type it straight into a computer. It's all done old school onto a legal type pad. So everything starts out as just scribbled notes on a piece of paper. But it's just the creative side of producing something from your imagination. Because if someone said, "Oh, you're going to write a 90,000 word book with 50 characters in it and all these events and all these things happening and all these intricate details," you think, no, I'll never come up with that. But then you do it a little bit at a time and you build up. I'm a big believer in sort of mind maps. So,
Hmm.
you end up with a big, that's the mind map for my first
Hmm.
first book. I don't know if you can see that on there, but that's
Yeah.
all the characters and events and happenings and whatever, all in one place, um, for a dangerous fossil. So that's how I can get it all on one piece of paper, so you can see what you're dealing with. Um, but no, I love being creative.
Well,
All good.
thank you so much for sharing your love for creativity and also sharing your characters, especially Jurassic Gemma and Dino. Now, as we conclude this, where can people find your work?
Um, my books are all available on Amazon. So if people have Kindles or if they have Kindle Unlimited, it's on all those platforms. So you can buy a paperback, you can buy a hardback, you can buy an ebook. I've done an audio book of the first book, The Dangerous Fossil. I haven't got around to the other two yet. That's a different project, but so it's available in a lot of places. Certainly around the UK, it's available in physical form in a number of shops and fossil centres, but certainly not in the US. So in the US, it would probably have to be from Amazon, as it gives independent authors the opportunity to publish without massive costs involved. I've got a website with all the murder mystery games on called playmurdermystery.com. So that's got probably about 40 different murder mystery games. So if anybody fancies a party, we sell a lot of games around Halloween time because a lot of people like, especially in America, they love the Halloween parties. So some of the the games I had in that format have been very very big sellers, especially in the States. I've got a little website called Jurassic-Gemma.co.uk, which just gives a few details of the books and pictures of the covers and links to where people can buy them from. My main social media is on Instagram, which is John J. Delaney, author. But I'm on quite a few of the other social media platforms as well. So hopefully, and if someone searches a dangerous fossil, that should get you to one of the links somewhere along the line.
For those in the audience, please give a like, subscribe, and please share this episode so that other people may also discover the awesome writings of our guest today, John Delaney. Again, John, thank you for being a guest here on the podcast. And to everyone listening, have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the opportunity.